East and West Learning Connections
helps people of different cultures break barriers and connect with each other.
Together, let's make learning and connections happen.
Together, we make cross-cultural learning and connections happen.
Okay, we've made a plan for Dennis and I for some conversation about telling our life story and telling about the kind of work we do. So we thought we'd start, both of us, by talking about how we came to be writers in the first place. Why did we each start, and can you make a living at it? So Dennis, I'm going to punt to you to start telling me how did you start out writing? Did you do it as a small boy or a...
Well, gee whiz. I was going to go. I have written a couple of pages of stuff, which is a story basically about my life. But if on the issue of starting writing, well, when I was a kid, I always knew I was a writer, but nothing else did anything for me. You know, my dad was an engineer. And as far as I was concerned, he could keep that, right? I had no interest. I always wanted to be a novelist, right? And what happened to get me on the poetry stream was I went to the Banff School of Fine Arts in the 70s, which is where all writers go during their life once or twice to learn stuff. And while I was there in the 70s for the first time doing W.O. Mitchell's messy method of writing novels, right? Because that's what I was going to be. It was a novelist. Well, what happened while I was there was that his messy method means you just put anything on the page that comes to your mind, right? And it turned out that Eli Mandel, who of course was a poet at the time, he he circled some of the stuff I had just splurged on a page, and he said, "This is a poem. I want you to make it in short lines." So I I took the stuff and I made it in short lines and gave it back to him, and he says, "You must submit this to the Bliss Carman Award." And I didn't have any choice about it whatsoever. He just prevailed upon me to do that. And I'm okay, fine, fine. And the lucky coincidence that happened was that it took the silver medal, my first poem, even though I'm a novelist, right? And that sort of changed my life completely. And I'm going, gee, if I can do this, I suppose I should try and write it. And so I ended up from that launching into my poetry world, although I've written in several other different streams. But that's where I sort of started I was early 20s when I was told I was a poet. So I just went, okay, fine, sure, whatever. So, carry on.
Okay, well, my tale is not quite as encouraging in the early days. I did write poetry from the time I was very little. As a matter of fact, I came across one that had been written when I was 7 years old in
Oh.
a it was a letter, an airmail letter. My dad was over in Canada by then, and we were
Mhm.
still in Scotland waiting for him to find a job and be able to bring us over. And so there's a little four-line poem going back that far.
Mhm.
When I was growing up and I grew up in Toronto, in Scarborough, actually, um, I never met anybody else who wanted to write poetry. And when I was going to high school, it was so uncool to write poems. So I just, I was already not very popular in school, and I thought this would be the kiss of death. So I never told anybody about it, even the person I married, the man I married, I never showed him any of my poems or anything like that. And the marriage broke up and I sort of left town and came to Edmonton. And for the first time, I found a community here. And one of the things I think that is so important about being a writer is, yes, of course, you go to your desk and you're by yourself and you have to focus on writing. But if you don't have support, if you don't have interest from people around you, it never goes any further than very basic. And so when I found this poetry group here, um, it was magic. It really opened the doors. So I was in my 30s by the time I came here.
Really?
Yeah. And so,
Mm.
but it kind of, that's one of the reasons you can never get me to leave Edmonton because it was so
Yeah.
important to me. But yeah, that was my story. I've always
Mm.
liked writing poetry, and it's been my first line of writing. But I did do a couple of young adult fantasy novels, which I always liked reading when I was a kid. Um, but poetry always grabbed me back. However, Dennis, I do want to punt back to the question of making a living
Mm.
as a writer, because you sure don't make it as a poet, do you?
No, no, that's for sure. So what are you asking me? How
I'm
many
asking
millions
you,
I made?
so you're writing because you don't you write poetry, but you write many other things
Yes.
to I assume make a living out of writing.
To some respects, yes. But it being a long story, but the important thing that happened just when I started to get off the ground, I divorced my first wife, who was my only wife, and but at the same time, when I moved out to the house we'd originally bought, um, I got chronic fatigue syndrome, and that is a real killer. And I can tell you that for 20 years, I basically was in bed 7 days of the week. And the only time I got out of bed was to write an article, like a fishing article to send off to somebody, because of course I had done so much fishing. And over the years, I ended up publishing 2,000 of them. So, and I was also the fishing columnist for the Times Colonist newspaper in Victoria. And so, that sort of put together a little bit of a living. And but I've never been a person who spent much on myself. So it's, I've never really needed a great deal of money, right? And in the long run, which it brings it up to today, is my parents passed and spread out all their money to the three kids, including me. And with that, I started a big grant with the Writers Trust, which has just started last year.
Uh-huh.
And it gives out 8 grants of five, or no, 5 grants of 8 grand each to poor poets who are good. And
Uh-huh.
um, that should carry on. Just the way the funding should work is that will carry on in perpetuity. So that's one. And now I've got the League of Canadian Poets asking me to do one with them.
You'll have all of us lined up at your door.
Yeah, right. Well, the thing is that because I've never really used money, I've never spent much on myself. I mean, the biggest thing I ever spent on myself was I went to Patagonia 5 years ago and did a fly fishing trip there. And
Oh,
it was magical. And of course, Patagonia is a magical country for Canadians, right? And it was really quite the thing. But I haven't done anything like that since then, although I do fish in Vancouver Island all the time, right? And I have a boat, right?
okay. Did you get poetry out of that trip?
Or probably, but I can't say that I did that. Along the way, I've just sort of had subjects come up, and
Uh,
then they end up being big enough for a book. I'll give you one was that was an example of this, but it's called "You Shall Have No Other," and I decided that I would write a book about child sexual abuse, which is a difficult subject to write about. And what I did was I wrote a book about that. And then I ultimately made a website, which I then learned how to make videos. And I made 58 videos for that site, and they're all up on sandria.ca, so anybody can go and look at them. And I've left it so if people want to take them, they can take them. And if they like if they want the writing, they can take it and change it any way they want and publish their own book. So that's an example of one of the things that I've done along the way. So,
Well, jumping in on my side, no, I never expected to make a living out of writing poems, which gives you a lot of freedom, actually, doesn't it? You're not trying to write for a market. You're essentially
yeah,
writing to express what you need to express. But
yeah.
one,
Sorry, just to let me say,
oh,
yes,
sure.
I'm exactly the same way as you are in that
Yeah,
respect. You just write what you write.
but you
Yeah.
need to. However, you do have to make a living, and being able to write is, in fact, a rather useful skill. So what I did for many years was I was a freelance writer. I did a lot of work for electric utilities here
Mhm.
in Edmonton. So if you'd like me to explain the structure of the electric industry in Alberta, I can go on a great and boring length. But it's what was lovely about freelancing for me was having the chance to basically um, have the space to do some writing and also to do a lot of the community organizing that I wanted to do. Because having found a community here, I wanted to be part of it and to support it and help it grow. So yeah, it's interesting because I was actually much better paid to write things about the utility industry than I would ever be paid for
Yeah.
the poems, and that actually has supported me over the last 40 years. So
Right. Well, as I said, the writing about fishing and, you know, putting out 2,000 articles to magazines and websites for cash, that was basically my income for quite a long time.
quite a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And as I said, during the same period, I had chronic fatigue syndrome and was very ill. And all I could do was get out of bed, write a fishing article, and send it off back to bed. That was 20 years of my life.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's talk a little bit now about we both write poetry and prose. Um, do you want to tell me a little bit or tell us a bit about your books, the ones you've published? Um,
Oh,
both poetry and prose.
right. I actually did a two-pager on the kind of stuff that I've done over my life, but I didn't really look. Um, I didn't really. Um, Sorry, I've forgotten the question here.
You weren't thinking about speaking about the book specifically.
Oh, right. No, I wasn't doing that. Um, but as I said, like I've now gotten to the point where I've written 10 books of poetry, and the next one out is my 19th book. And what I gave you an example of "You Shall Have No Other," but that's the only one that I've written that was on a very difficult subject. Another one I did was when PK Page came along and got everybody to write glosas. I wrote a book called "The Spirit of the Thing and the Thing Itself," an entire book of glosas. So that's an example. And that title, by the way, comes from indigenous mythology. And because I did an awful lot of work out on the West Coast in Bamfield, and they had a saying about everything that there was, it was the spirit of the thing and the thing itself. Everything was two things, right? And
Mhm.
so that got me doing the glosa thing as well. And
Dennis, I'm just going to interrupt because I bet you a lot of people online don't know what a glosa is.
oh, okay. A glosa is a form from the 15th century in Spain, and it was first brought over, or Marilyn Bowring got it from Robin Skelton, who, and she gave it to PK Page, who then was the person who got everybody um, writing glosas in Canada, or everybody she met, and that included me, because I used to know her as well. And so I wrote an entire book on the subject. And a glossa is a four-stanza poem. Each is 10 lines. You start with a four-line quote from some other poet, and then you use the first line of the quote as the 10th line of the first stanza. You use the second line of the four-line quote as the 10th line of the second stanza, and so on. In addition to that, you rhyme with the 10th line, the ninth line, and the sixth line. And so that is an overwhelming thing that has to be done, is the poetry, or is the rhyming. And then depending on who you take the four-line quote from, that influences heavily what you write about. Because there's all of, in essence, you have what, 12 rhymes in the in the poem. And so you have to do that as part of the overall structure of the thing. And as I said, I wrote a book based on the Indian mythology of
Well, one of the
everything being.
things that I just wanted to point out, something quite important in a way about the poetry world, um, is that we do inspire each other. And the glossa form is a really yeah, it's an example of how that happens. But
Yeah,
also, as you said, so and so asked you to submit that poem to an award, so and so else, and we help each other to make the connections and come into the
right.
world. And
Yeah,
sometimes I think that is the very hardest thing for beginning writers to do is to become connected to you don't need to be connected to the very top level of authors, but you need to have someone who will take you by the hand and say, this is what you do, and this is how you can get better at what you're doing, which to me is really what you've been saying all along as you give us the names of
yeah,
the people that have influenced you.
yeah, that's mentorship. And it turns out that I started a fund at the League of Canadian Poets quite some time ago, 15, 20 years, called the PK Page Mentorship Fund. And that was the purpose of that, was to introduce young and growing poets to senior people so they could learn things from that person. And that
Yeah,
program still goes on.
yeah, that's a I think that's a really important contribution in many ways. Um, so you've published books about fishing, books about novels, and poetry. Are there ways in which they're connected and you're like
Well,
the to each other?
I have a novel out there that as I said, when I spent all the time out in Banfield, which is on the ocean, and I was out there fishing at the request of fancy lodges, which really was great for me. I didn't have to pay anything. I just got there and did the stuff. And during that period, I became very interested in the history of Banfield. And I spent many years in the BC Museum and talking to Indigenous people to get the story there of that. And the novel I wrote basically covered both sides of the story, which is both the white guys of the 18th century and the Indigenous people at the same time. And that book, somehow or other, although it won an award, it never was actually published. So I'm now reading it for about the third time. It's just been sitting there for years, right?
Oh
And I
dear.
may send it somewhere else, but at the moment it isn't, right?
Yeah, that's the other side of writing is that you
Yeah,
do want it to get it published, and that doesn't always come easy, does it?
no, no, no.
I My story is that I had to start a publishing company to get my first book of poetry published.
That's
Um,
funny.
yeah,
What was the company?
well, it was a very weird organization called the Books Collective, and it was a whole bunch of of writers, fiction, poetry, and others in Edmonton. And we thought none of us like to sell books and distribute them, but we really like putting them together, and we like reading manuscripts and getting these lovely projects out. So what if each of us we got together about 5 different imprints. So there was one group that wanted to do young adult novels, one group that wanted to do poetry, one that was doing comics, another that did novels. And so we all got busy, and we found the books we wanted to publish and all the rest of it. And the idea is that as a group, we would do the marketing and the distribution I think we brought out quite a few books during the 1990s, but it still didn't get us over the hump that it's a lot of work to put books out into the world and sell them and find bookstores that'll carry them. So it is no longer there, but it was certainly an experience. And I will say, that's another way, another part of the job of being a writer is trying to connect with the world of publishing. And that's been a remarkably changeful world in the last 2 decades and a half. Publishing has been changing so much with online stuff and all the rest of it. But anyway, it's a whole ecosystem. So we say.
That's for sure. Oh, and you probably you're a member of a writers group. I was wondering is Gary Garrison from Calgary?
No, he's from Edmonton.
No, I mean in the past, like say high school.
Oh, I don't know. No, he was from the United States. Okay, we're
Oh,
going
okay.
we better not go down. Do you remember so and so? Otherwise,
Well,
we'll mystify our audience.
sorry, I went to high school with a fellow of that name.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's where the connection is.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay. Don't want what we want to do is tell you a little bit about ourselves and then get to the point where we're able to share our poems with Anna's help. So maybe shall I talk a little bit about my
You
books?
talk for sure.
Okay. Well, one I wanted to show you is this essay collection. Now, does that turn out flipped?
Yes, looks fine.
Does, okay. Well, this is Intersecting Sets, A Poet Looks at Science. Was published by the University of Alberta Press. And one of the things that has gone through my life is a fascination with science ever since I was a kid. I've never studied it formally, but I find there's a great overlap to me between writing poetry and a scientist's work. What do? We observe the world, we try our best to understand it, and then we try to communicate that understanding in a way that reaches other people. Now, for scientists, of course, they're understanding relationships and mathematical formulae and all that kind of thing, and then they're writing academic papers. And poets, of course, are doing their thing and writing poems. But there's something really basically the same about those activities. This sense that the world is an amazing place. We want to understand it better and to share it. So that was the reason that science started to come more and more into my poems. And then there's a point at which you think, no, I can't say everything I want in a poem. I would take it for years, decades, as a matter of pride. I can do anything that I want in a poem. I can tell stories. I can rant. I can write humor. I can write tragedy. I can do whatever I want. But sometimes you actually do need to take away the constraints of poetry and all the attention you have to pay to sound and form and all that. and just say, no, I want to explore this I want to share this information in a more straightforward way. And so that's why I turned to this book of essays, which did win a number of awards, actually, or get shortlisted for them. So I'm actually quite proud of it.
Yeah.
And then
I tried to pick it up on Amazon last week and they were out of them.
oh, I know. Well, it's been out for a few years now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's not always easy to come by,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And the other cover I wanted to show you is this is a book of
Welcome.
poetry called Welcome to the Anthropocene. And it's got a lot of science in it. And it's about, once again, trying to find, trying to understand our place in the world. So it starts out, it's a big, long poem, the title poem, but it doesn't, then the rest of the book goes into more local and personal kinds of poems, because to me, you always have to keep the big picture rooted in the here and now and the person that the poet is. So those were just two books of the 12
Mhm.
I've written, 13 I've written that I wanted to just show you.
Mhm.
Now, in terms of the time, Anna, do you think we could kind of start reading poems now a little bit and
Sure,
have,
sure. And I will share your poem, okay? I will
okay.
share your poem. So let me share. Okay, let me share which one. This one. Okay. This, okay. So you can see, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
Okay. So shall I read it first and then?
Yeah, sure.
It's called Rectangularization of the Morbidity Curve. And I just want to give you a little bit of explanation of that title because it's a little bit pretentious. The morbidity curve is one name that scientists and researchers give to the shape of it's the statistics of people's deaths. Do we go along in a very straight line and then almost immediately die? Or do we have a long period, a more or less long period of declining health and capacity and then reach the end? And one of the things that always gets me about science is it gives me these wonderful phrases that sound so mysterious. And when I came across rectangularization of the morbidity curve, it just sent off little buzzers in my head. At the time, I also wanted to write a poem about my father who contracted Alzheimer in his 70s, lived into his 80s, and so he had the long, slow decline. So I wanted to write about that. I'm going to actually read it from the page here of my book. The demographers desired geometry, a hale old age, and then a rapid fall, a sudden tumble down a slope of scree to that inevitable oblong box. And we agree, oh, that's the way I want to go. The unexpected failure of an artery from which we never waken. We dread the lingering morbidities ahead, the slow occlusions of cognition, bodies angled into immobility, diapered, and life a sad, sagged line tethered to an all too distant other end. But then I think of you. You said it too. Oh, just put me on an ice floe. Send me off. I won't want to live. And yet you did. At no point on that curve of long diminishment were you prepared to leave, to face the cliff. You wanted life until its end. And then I think of curves, the gull's wing drawn from lifting shoulder to the tapered tip, trailing its final feather into air. A line lovelier, perhaps, than that sharp edge of rock plunging to ocean. How to end this? There will be the narrow plot, the dug rectangle. Until then, there will be seagulls wheeling over headlands.
发病率曲线的矩形化，人口统计学家理想的几何图形，健康的活到老年，然后迅速陡落，像实力波上的石子，骤然滚落，跌入那无法避免的长方盒子。我们认同，哦，这就是我想要的方式。一条动脉的意外故障，让我们不再醒来。我们畏惧未来挥之不去的病痛，认知逐渐迟缓，身体无法动弹，整日被尿布缠绕，生命变成一根忧伤的松垂之线，系在那遥远不可及的另一端。但我想到了你，你也说过，把我放在浮冰上，把我送走，我不想苟活。但你还是活了下来，在那漫长的衰减过程中，你始终未做好离开的准备，去直面那悬崖。你想活到尽头，于是我想起了那曲线，海鸥的翅膀同上扬的肩部延展至纤细的翅翼，将最后一根羽毛拖入空中。或许这比那锋利的坠崖石落入海更加温柔。如何结束这一切？终会有狭窄的地块，被挖掘出的长方矩形。在这之前，将会有海鸥在夹角上上空盘旋。
So that was thank you, Anna. It's magic to hear it in another language. And I'm listening to sort of for the sounds of it, the patterns of sounds that make poetry. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to say, when I translated this poem, I feel I learned. You just connect things so naturally, from science to natural, to the seagull, like the wave, the curved lines, and also to Hume's life, right? It's wonderful, yeah. So thank you.
Okay, are you going to share one of Dennis's then?
Does DC want to read a poem yourself?
Sure, I can do that. I bought the book that Anna translated my work into Chinese, so it's in this book as well as on the screen. And one of the styles that I like to write in, I prefer to write in a tangential way. Like narrative is not that, I write lots of narrative stuff, but narrative is not the way I like to write them the most. What I like to write is a tangential way that the lines only have a tangent in terms of their connection with the other ones. And you just follow it through. And if you don't get mixed up, it worked, right? Even though the narrative connection between some of the lines, I don't do that. But I'll read this one. I'll give you an example of one of the techniques that I use that does that. I have some poems that I begin certain parts of it with a line that starts with as if, and that allows me to change subjects easily. But then this is called Then the Further Day. And it starts with a quote from Jennifer Warren and Leonard Cohen. She saw the Queen of Heaven once and kept the vision in her soul. No one believed what she had seen. No one believed what she heard. Now, the second quote on that one is from Jan Zawicki, and it's a very wise quote. And it says, myth is history we need. I think that's a good way to put it. Now, you'll notice I use the as if approach in this poem. As if the white wasps in their paper casings were symbols of wisdom, and so a promise I could trust. As if the rain falling fitfully on the house-rounded shore were a selflessness, and giving in to destiny were admirable completely. As if the land was not to be heard at night pouring winter through itself to Gonzales Bay. Mornings of white light when Taylor self walks the water untethered. And before me, even before me, Spanish captains with black between their teeth, squiring names. San Juan, Esperanza, Escalante, they could not escape through the residue of memory. In its time, when it is ready, the ocean turns and sings the calcium from bone until it is no more. Come on, let me hold you. Won't you let me hold you like Bernadette would do? That's from the song, Jennifer Warren song is Bernadette. And hence, because the last line's that, I assume people go back to that, even if they don't know the song of Bernadette, which is a lovely song. But as I said, in this, you see the tangential way that I've dealt with moving from one thing to another. And as I said, I do narrative as well, but I like it when I can get things that are not directly connected to join up. So that's what happened in this poem.
Okay, then Reid also asked me to read the Chinese translation, and I want to say Reid's poem is sometimes have a challenge to translate because the jump, like kind of a jump, like a subconscious, the logical, it's very difficult. First, you need to understand, then you translate. So, and especially because for the book, I will talk a little bit later, or he will talk, but I will read the translation first. 之后的日子，他却曾见过天后一次，并将这景象铭记于心。无人相信他亲眼所见，无人相信他亲耳所听。珍妮弗·沃伦和兰勒德·科恩，神话是我们渴求的历史。杨兹威基，犹如纸壳中的白风，是智慧的象征，而我可托付之承诺也如是。犹如雨水淅沥地落在房屋环绕的河岸，是一种无私，并且对命运的顺从完全值得赞美。犹如夜晚，大地失聪于自己，向冈萨雷斯湾倾泻冬天的气息。白色光亮的清晨，苍白如我，无羁绊，漫步水面。至于在我之前，牙齿发黑的西班牙船长，珍贵的名字圣胡安、埃斯贝兰萨、埃斯卡兰特，他们无法从残留的记忆中逃脱。在时限之内，当他就绪，大海翻转，银鹅生命残额，直到消失殆尽。来，让我抱着你，让我抱着你，就像圣伯勒泰特被如此。Yeah. So, yeah, you want to continue to read this? Because I'm sharing, so I just want to make, yeah.
Ultimately, I'll read that, but let's go back to Alice.
Why don't actually, Anna, could we talk about what
Yeah.
it was like for you and Dennis to work on this? Like you'd worked not just on individual poems, but the whole book, and that must
Yeah.
have been an interesting
Mhm.
Okay.
project to do together.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. I will say this book, and we also like the title. We decided to choose one line from like a title from one of his poems. So
Hmm.
it's a little bit difficult to choose the title, but yeah, he has a poem, and we use part of the line from that poem. It's one poem, and what we do not know is what I translate DC's poems because I found what I do not know. Then I found I know a little bit, a little bit, a little bit each time. Yeah, each time. So that's I said, oh, perfect, and that's amazing me because each time I deal with another poet's work, I always learn a lot, right? So that's why I really like this title as well. And for his poems, the first part is glossal. So he mentioned it before, it's difficult to translate because you borrow the 4 lines from another poet. And he also changed the glossal's like a format. He created a little bit, make his own like format. So when I translate, I also need to do the rhyme and follow the pattern. So and also because his logical also is expand. It's not like it's like yeah, like for example he will deal with some science like topic in snow time. He will talk about the time like the space like a light year or some like or like so it's like a little and snow time and the change. And he also will talk about like the leave, get the light will be how to say, get the life, right? So this kind of scientific like term. So you need to, I mean, I needed to really think a lot to connect, get the connection between them to translate. And he used a lot for metaphor. And the metaphor is, for example, the curtain, like the curtain blocks
Yeah.
the sun, blocks the sunlight, right? And the curtain later he used it like the ring, the curtain curved, like he 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 described he metaphor as the like the lover's skin when the time passes on, the skin wrinkled,
Oh yeah. Oh, I
and
get.
also and also the peach, the dead peach in winter, the peach, the skin, you know. So you need to all connect together, and you find an oh. So and what his message is at the end, his message is like seize the day, live in the moment, seize the day. So so it's like yeah, in snow time. So he has a little bit I like it's a little bit dark humor there, and also it's a little bit sad there as well. So it's you can feel a little bit of sorrow there. So that's what I got the feeling. So actually, after I translated his poem, I wrote afterward, and title is "What We Do Not Know." And also because I wrote a poem as in this afterward I have a poem. It's said New Year's wish, and the New Year's wish means I don't make any wish after translating his poems because I feel the world always change. The always like we have good wishes, but still it's a little bit sad. Like they always have some sad things. So I know that I don't make any wishes because I don't want to go party, don't drink. But anyway, so it's you need to read the poem, read the book, then you know what really I feel about the DC's poems and writings. So anyway, so that's what I want to say.
You know, this is really fascinating, Anna. do you think we could go back to, yes, to see
Okay.
you can say, and what I'm wondering is,
Let me just.
let you work through your texting.
Okay.
But actually, what I was thinking, Dennis, would you be up for, shall we just ask if people have questions at this point? Things they'd like to comment on or
I
uh,
see. Yes, I noticed that we've gone for an hour now.
yeah, yeah, we've
Maybe
been
it's that
talking
point.
enough.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
but
we should.
I like DC. You have prepared like 2 pages uh about your life, right?
Yeah.
Before we enter to this Q&A, would you like to read that or tell something from that
Well,
about yourself?
you now know a bunch of it, but I can sort of go through and put the
Mhm.
stuff in that wasn't there or that
Yeah.
you haven't heard so far.
Okay. So, but would
Yeah,
you like to? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'll just sort of go through the stuff that hasn't been said so far.
Mhm. Mhm.
My first degree is in biochemistry and zoology, and so that's influenced my thinking ever since. And I'll pick that up a bit further down the road. It gives me different extra subjects to cover in what I write. Now, my second degree in England, I read not wildly, widely, as they were only willing to do English philosophy, which meant logic and that kind of stuff. And I was much more interested in the stuff that, the Germans were doing. And uh, and so I read, oh, you'll see that in Nunc Dimittis, I mentioned Heidegger, Husserl, and Wittgenstein. And I didn't put in language games, but that's Wittgenstein. And I did that wide-ranging reading um, while I was supposed to be doing other things. And then this stuff, the good stuff, found its way into what I write, right? So, um, oh, right. One of my sites, which is dcreid.ca, it has lots in the human brain because of my science background, as well as creativity. I put together a book of 70 measures to improve your creativity, and it's looking for a publisher, but it would do for poets and the rest of society. Now, it's got a lot of neuroplasticity in it, which is how the brain works. And um, oh yeah, along the way, I've served as president of the League, Federation of BC Writers, and the Butler Book Prizes. And here's something. My third degree, which is a master's in public administration, I worked for the Ministry of Finance. And I'm a poet in a finance world with everybody who, if you're not moving ahead to get your career moving, they don't want to know anything about you. And here I am, Mr. Poet, going, God, I don't really want to be here, but it earns me a living, right? And so I was very unhappy while I was working there. But the thing that I gained from it, and this is like 30 years later, it has allowed me to figure out statistics on any subject in the world. And that has been as the most useful outcome for a period of 8 years when I wasn't very happy. And I use it all the time. And I'm confident in what I do because I learned it as part of that process, right? Let's see. What else is there? Oh, I want to tell you a couple of things about being out in the nature. My big thing as an adult is I've always been in nature. When I was when I was on when I was on that cliff and as a child, the falcons used to zoom down from out of the sky. They'd come down and go, ew, cree cree, and then zoom off in another direction. And then another falcon would come down and go, ew, cree cree, and go off in another direction. And I used to just lie there eating the Saskatoons on the edge of the cliff, right? Because that's an Alberta thing. And but I've always been a person who's been out in nature. And um, to give you an example of something, I didn't feel it as a kid, but as an adult, when I was going out into the nature here, I always got the feeling that something was watching me. And it was the scariest feeling I ever had because of, you know, and it was only when you were alone. If you were with other people, didn't happen. But if you were alone, you got this awful sense of being watched. And I just wanted to drop everything and run back to my car and drive away. It was so scary. And but then I came to realize that the reason that you feel watched is because way back when we used to be prey items, and animals would watch us to come in and then eat us, and we needed to know that. So that's where that came from. At that point, I was totally easy with it, right? And I'll tell you another magical thing that happened to me out there in the woods. I was trying to find on my GPS from one spot to another spot that I'd put in it sometime before. And I was going through this terribly thick forest. And then I came upon this patch where I started walking up, and all that was there was black soil underneath the trees. And I tripped over the edge and fell directly into a herd of elk. And that turned out to be one of the most magical, scary moments of my life because the the buck of the group, he came after me and he flew his antlers around and he cut through my clothes and made a big red bloody mark on my arm. At which point I fell down and I didn't do anything. And fortunately for me, they all left, right? So I was okay. I was hunky dory. But in the long run, it's turned out to be this magical thing that's happened to me, and I wouldn't have given it up for anything. Now I'll tell you one more. I've got a whole bunch, but I'll just tell you one more. This one's I was standing on a cliff about 20 feet above the river and looking off into the distance. And in the distance, I'm seeing this bird fly toward me, and I'm going, that must be a pretty big bird, kind of thing. And it flew sort of like in a mile directly at me. And as I got closer, I realized it was a bald eagle. And what happened was it didn't see me standing there on the cliff, but because it was flying at river level, it had to go up. And it came and it right below me, it came up. And when it saw me, its wings went out like this, and my arms went out like that, and then its chest hit my chest. And that's one of the most magical things that's ever happened to me in my life. I don't think I'll ever have anything that magical happen again to me. And that's what being out in the woods is about for me, is that there's some amazing things. Um, if I got a couple more minutes here. I'm a member of 5 writers organizations, but when the war is over in Ukraine, I'm going there with a group of Canadian poets for a reading series with Ukrainian poets and publishing a book of poetry with translations into both languages. Now we're hoping to deliver Zelensky or his representative a Canadian Indigenous artist's image of a falcon, which is one of the Ukraine's emblematic birds, and I guess it's one of mine too. And the last thing, which I'll end with, is that I started a major grant for poor poets with the Writers Trust, and I'm just about to start one with the League. And what happened here is when my parents passed, they distributed their funds to their children. And as I've never been a person to spend a lot of money on myself, I've used it to fund several awards for poets. And in the long run, I'll fund some environmental causes as well. And so that sort of brings you up to where I am right now. And so
Thank you, Dan.
that's all I have to say.
Thank you. So should we try for questions now if anyone would like to ask any? And maybe we could be not spotlighted anymore.
Sure. So, Anna, yeah, the spotlight, this, and
If
I
we
can
can
change
see
that.
everybody. There we go. Yes,
Mhm.
perfect.
So Alice, I was really moved listening to you reading your poem and Anna also. I mean, DC's poem, the poem, it's a lot of references there. I did not really quite understand. but your poem that about life and death, it's so beautiful. And I think either you go off the cliff or you like glide like a seagull. It's all natural and it's both beautiful. And I was touched by that. Yeah.
I'm glad.
Wow.
I think in a way, Dennis, that was what your poem was getting at as well, in a way.
Yes, the last line was the real thing. Come and let me hold you. Won't you let me hold you like Bernadette would do? Because the beginning quote is about her uh, feeling
From it.
God and taking
Yeah.
God into herself, right?
Yeah.
And so it was the same idea to end.
And it's interesting, I think, sometimes that we often circle around the same themes as poets, but we each have a different way of approaching putting words around it. I would be really interested to know about Chinese poets and whether or not I'm assuming that the same themes kind of come up in Chinese literature as well. There'd be differences, and I'm sorry, I know I'm asking you guys the question, but
Uh,
Uh, yeah, but that's like Anna can do more work on that, right?
okay. I for
The
me,
go for Anna.
okay. For me, like at the very beginning, like if I write in Chinese, right, to talk about death, it's very difficult for me to be open because death is it's like it's a bad sign.
Taboo.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, taboo, yeah, bad
Taboo.
sign to talk about it too. But later it's okay. I mean, now they even at my age now, I mean, you started to be more like be more open and be more free and but yeah, still when I but also this year I went back China, right? I met a lot of other poets, right? And some Chinese poets, some died also sometimes suddenly, right? It has so and we will write another poem to tribute them, to remember them. So yeah, this also become like when people like when some people die, then you know them better. You now you read the poem even more. Oh my God! Before I saw now sometimes I regret, right? Why I didn't read before more, right? So anyway, so yeah.
you know, I've run into that with poets too, that English language poets, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, why didn't I read this while she was alive?
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's a really good book, and I never got around to it. But it's one of the lovely things about poetry, isn't it? That whatever happens to its writers, the poems and the books can kind of still reach people.
Yeah,
Uh,
we just have one like very famous, very well-known poet, and he died more than 90 years old. So he
Mm.
lived very long, and he mentored another for writers, poets. He like only published one book, and this book is so good. They said some people said he only need one book.
he only needed one.
Xuan. So he lived from Taiwan, lived in Vancouver, but originally from China is from, yeah. So, and he's also editor, publisher. So he helped encourage a lot of writers, nurtured a lot of writers. So, yeah. And I was, yeah, in Mirrors and Window, I have one poem I translated his.
Okay.
Yeah, I regret why I didn't do more.
Do we have other questions like from participants on the
I'd say, Alina.
yeah, just Elena has a question.
Oh,
Just please
You mean
yeah.
you mean my? Okay. I
Would
have
you
questions. I don't know for English or for poetry. Really sometimes you sing it out sing how to say, because in Chinese poetry, sometimes we want to sing.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Because you mentioned Dennis, I mentioned about Jennifer Warren and also Leonard Cohen. Actually, it's two my famous. I really like Cohen. He's so great artist and also write a lot of poetry as well. But I have wondering why is one quote, maybe one poetry, why two person write one sentences? They call writer or something.
Right.
I know maybe they uh, I think it choose singer, right? So
Yeah.
what's the relationship with them? I know Cohen, so many women like Cohen so much. Really, he's so famous. I really like Hallelujah. A lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
songs is so good. Also, Join of Arc. So I don't know why the first one, just the last page in Dennis is a queen or something. Sorry, is already gone. I don't remember in my mind. So why one sentence is two-person write it? I don't quite understand that. Another question is maybe is so personal. You both is astronaut or internet? If people write poetry, is normally social people or more closer to the and write poetry at home.
Settings. One new item.
Dennis, I thought Jennifer Warren was the performer on Famous Blue Raincoat, but was she also a composer?
Yes, in fact, the Song of Bernadette is mostly attributed to her,
Oh,
with
really? I
Leonard
didn't know
Leonard
that.
Cohen being the secondary person.
Oh,
I didn't realize this. I assumed it was a Leonard Cohen song,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
after knowing it for 20 years, found a reference that said that Jennifer Warren is actually the major writer of that song, Bernadette.
Really?
Yeah. So, but
Um,
he was part of it, and yes, there is a famous version of the song with both of them.
mhm.
Yeah.
The I think that question of poetry and song is a very and how they overlap is an interesting one. Leonard Cohen's book, Let Us Compare Mythologies. I got that. That was the first poetry book, kind of grown-up poetry book that I ever had, and
Hmm.
it was
Wow.
and so I thought of him as a poet on the page for years. And then of course all of a sudden he's this amazing performer. And it's songs he's writing. But they are actually slightly different ways of writing.
Right.
Um, I don't I remember being asked to write what's called the libretto for a
Hmm.
composition, a choral composition. And I had a devil of a time doing it because I had to figure out how to let the music tell the story, as opposed to Alice wanting to write it all down in it's a different way of thinking it because you're balancing the two art forms. And I'm a control freak. I want to take over. But yeah, that's a very interesting question, Elena. And what was the other one you were asking about again? The other thing?
Yeah, another question is maybe too personal. I don't know. In poetry, a lot of people is introvert or extrovert, and you're two person. I think Dennis make a lot of like imagine or something. I think you Dennis is more introvert, right? I think Alice is
Obviously, yes.
right.
Well, I'm both.
I guess
I'm both.
correctly.
I'm both, but a strong introvert, yes, as well.
Yeah, no, I'm an extrovert on occasion when I think that's what makes my nose go red, actually. Is when I'm out in public. It's more of a stressor. So I I enjoy being home and not not having to resonate with all the other people around me. But
Okay,
this is very nice, though. I'm not complaining.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other questions that have popped into people's heads?
Yeah, I'm curious about this statistics, DC. You said it's extremely important to you. So, like, in what way can you give us an example?
I'll give you an example, just to pick one out of the I would go and get statistics from Stats Canada to figure out what the poverty level is in Canada, because I'm doing some work where that's an important part of the process is to figure out, well, it's for a grant for somebody who isn't well off, and you have to know what isn't well off. And so with the stats that they give out, you can then calculate what is an income level that's likely to be a poor poet's income, right? The other statistic for that one is line 23,600 in the income tax form, and that's another version of that. So, but as I said, you want a statistic? I'll give you a statistic very shortly. Whatever you want, just ask me and I'll get it for you. That's the reality.
Uh-huh. So if we could ask you to find out what the ratio of male to female poets in Canada was, you could do that.
Yeah, I would like mention Alice Major. It's a very, very great mentor. Yeah. And
We had fun working together, weren't we?
yeah, I got 2 years ago I got a smaller grant for mentor, right, from the Writer Union of Canada, and Alice helped me to write an application to apply Canadian Arts Council project. Without her help, I think I couldn't do that. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I've written a lot of grant applications in my life for other people. Yes.
And that's why I told Yang and other Chinese people, I said, usually it's very good to learn from how to write a grant. Otherwise, it's so difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that I know about that, Alice, I have a grant that I need help with writing for.
Well, I'm your gal.
So is there a reason I was going to ask you? What is
I got tired of writing the periods behind them, so I went with DC Reid as opposed to D period C period Reid. And that's what I do. And as I said, the name you got on the screen there, it's from my Visa card, so it seems somehow to have, authority or something.
But yes, I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, right. Well, as I said, the one email address I use most commonly is dcreid@islandnet.com. And IslandNet is a company here in Victoria. We're on an island, so it's an islandnet.com. And probably if you just simply Google, what's my email address, you probably come up with something.
Today you're both into science and you're both poets. So I got a poem. I think it raises a serious question about science, and it's in the form of a poem. But I don't know whether we have enough time to talk about it. But if you both can give a little bit of your thought on that, it'll be great. So this poem reads by anonymous also, okay? This poem reads as this. You're so into the idea of science, sometimes you tend to dismiss what's happening in front of our eyes, or logic or common sense ordinary people use in their daily lives. But do you remember, my love? It takes a little one's innocence for the trained world to realize what the Empress' new clothes is. So I think that poem raises question about science. If you too much stick to the idea, the ideology, but sometimes you ignore common sense. So I'd like to, ask you to share your thought on that. Have you ever thought of that?
Oh, yes, and I've had very extensive arguments with other poets. There's a very well-known poet called Al Moritz who disagrees with me fundamentally on bringing science into poetry.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
So, but I think, well, for one thing, ideology is a human characteristic, and it doesn't just apply to scientists, it applies to politics and all sorts of other fields of endeavor. We get ideas that are fixed in our heads. I would say that the good scientists and the good poets are the ones that keep their minds open to alternative ways of solving the equations or looking at the connections, understanding the relationships. But and we have to also distinguish between science and technology. Technology can be rather narrowing. It's sort of problem solving. How do we make the internet do this? How do we get how do we reduce carbon emissions from vehicles? Well, it's kind of very practical based. I have to confess, I really like physicists. I like the guys that are thinking, so where did the world come from? What made the universe come into being? How does it work? Though that is also science, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves that those big questions, even though they seem very far removed from day-to-day life or common sense even, that they are the important ones. What is it about this universe that makes it possible for creatures like us to get to arise and think about the world, have relationships among ourselves and with the world? It almost doesn't matter that whether we'll solve whatever technological problems we have to. I'm hopeful. I've got my fingers crossed. But why are we solving the problems? What's important about finding solutions to living together with the planet and humans in a sustainable way? So that's I just go kind of. I tried to say that to Al Moritz, but I don't think he was convinced.
I see. Right. Well, I tend to look at any subject. Science is one. I'm not as right as much about science as you do, because I've just finished Welcome to the Anthropocene, and it's obvious from that poem your interest in science. In my case, what I tend to do about areas that I don't know a huge amount about, I look at them as being language games, that old thing from Wittgenstein. And using that, it allows you to take some stuff out of that other realm or whatever it is and use it without having to write about, let's say, science, because language games can be about anything.
Yeah.
So, but that's my way of looking at it. So in other words, in that poem, the second one, which is Nunc Dimittis, I mentioned Husserl, Heidegger, and Wittgenstein. And that's just come out of from way back when in the early 70s when I sat in my room reading about those philosophers because I was so bored with reading about logic.
Well, I have to say, I crashed out of second year philosophy and in university and never did figure out what Wittgenstein was going on about.
Oh, he was one of the ones that I always liked.
For inquiries, please contact info@eawlc.org or visit our website at www.eawlc.org.